everybody, James here from Dizzyfeet Dancing, and welcome to our little 30-minute workshops. And today we're going to be looking at sway. Now, the definition of sway is the inclination of the body towards center of turn. It's important that you write that down because I will be testing you later. That does sound quite complicated, of course, but really it's not as tricky as it sounds. Now, we use sway in everyday life all the time when we're doing normal actions without necessarily realizing that we're doing it. It's especially obvious when you're riding a bike. Now, those of you that can't ride a bike or need stabilizers, perhaps you should look at a different video, or maybe this is a little learning curve for you as well, perhaps. But take those stabilizers off, and when you go round a corner, when you turn the handlebars, you'll find that you have a slight turning of the body. So if I'm turning my handlebars to the right, my body will shape slightly and lean slightly to the right. Likewise, if I go to the left, it does the opposite. And that is sway. And what it does, it allows us to turn to the right or to the left without falling over. All right? So that is what sway does. It allows us to do that without falling over. So if we were riding our bikes, unfortunately, I haven't got a bike here with me today to show you as an example, but you just have to imagine. So I'm riding my bike and I decide to just turn the handlebars like that. Well, naturally, natural forces will throw me off my bike to the left if I don't sway or shape or incline myself towards the center of the turn. Now, when you're turning to the right, the center's over there somewhere. If you're traveling at a certain speed, of course, if you're turning to the left, it's over there somewhere. So that's what happens. Now, when we don't do that, it causes us lots of problems. And this is very relevant to dance, of course. So when you don't have the necessary or the appropriate sway when you're dancing, things can either feel very peculiar or you'll fall over. And no one wants to do either of those two things, really. We don't want to feel peculiar or fall over. It's often they go hand in hand. When you feel a bit peculiar, often fall over, especially after a few drinks, which is quite often, quite likely, many of us during these lockdown periods. I know it is for me. Anyway, enough of that. So how does that relate to dancing in a practical sense? And shall I talk about that? Shall I tell you? Let's. Okay, so first and foremost, when you first learn to dance, sway is really there mostly to make you look better. Because when you first learn to dance, you'll, generally speaking, unless you're some sort of gifted individual, you'll come in and your primary objective will be to put your feet one foot in front of the other and move around the floor. That's the objective initially. You won't be thinking, and also it's very difficult to think about two things at the same time. So you're worrying about where your feet are going, and you're not going to be worrying about where your body is going, because we can't actually do two things at once. So you'll dance. If I did a social foxtrot, for instance, you do 1, 2, you just do stepping, and then you just do something like that. And there's nothing going on with the body because you're preoccupied with what your feet are doing. Now, those of you that have been to one of my absolute beginner classes and may have learnt the social foxtrots, and even those of you that perhaps have just overheard, initially, when you don't need the sway, sway is there purely to give the illusion of enjoyment. Because when you're dancing sedately, likewise when you're riding your bike very, very slowly, you need very marginal amounts of sway. You don't really need a great deal. So if I'm doing a little bit of sway like this as I'm doing my social foxtrot, it just looks nice. It looks like I'm enjoying myself and enjoying the motion in the dance. Okay? It actually isn't there for any other purpose other than that. And also, you may remember that I said at the very beginning that sway is the inclination of the body towards the center of turn. So generally speaking, it's only there when you're turning. Now, when you're not turning, it does facilitate movement and it does allow you to go past your partner, but ultimately it also makes it look nicer. There are other aspects as well that come into play, and one of those is what we call swing. But we're not going to talk about swing today. I might allude to it a bit later when I talk about something else. But generally speaking, I'm going to talk about turning actions where you are going to need to have sway. So we're going to look at sway in a particular figure to start with, and we'll use the natural turn in waltz as our benchmark figure for the moment. All right. Now I'm doing it as a man to start with, but the 6 steps of a natural turn in waltz, both the male and the female roles do the same steps, just at different times. So it's the same action, it's just whether you're going forward or whether you're going backwards. So it's exactly the same. So if we do it as a man, or the forward aspect first, sway doesn't happen on, in the waltz here, on the natural turn, doesn't happen on the first step, because we've got what's called CBM at this point here. Now, typically speaking, when we have CBM, which is the turn of the body towards the moving foot like so, we don't have any sways. It's very rare that we'd have sway at that point there, because that just makes us look a bit too cool, and we can't look too cool when we're doing the waltz. So you take a step, your body turns. That gives the indication to the person in front of you that there's going to be a turn, that you're going to do some sort of turn in the waltz in this context. Now, the sway happens as you leave that step and as you begin to turn, all right? Because on the first step, there is no turn. You're just preparing, essentially. You're getting ready. You popped your indicator on, ready to turn to the right. Now, the sway happens as you leave this foot, and then it goes to the right, okay? And then you sustain the sway as you close your feet. And that generally helps you to balance. Because if you were to sway, if you were to do the sway as you turn and then take the sway away as you close your feet, you will fall over. It doesn't allow you to balance. Now, what it does, I feel that as I sway here, I anchor myself to the right. That puts my weight to the right-hand side, which allows me, if I do this sideways, if I do it here actually. So I go straight, no turn. I'm preparing to turn, indicator on. And then I'm popping the sway on as I'm turning. Now, this has anchored me here. My left leg's gone out of the way, then this leg can close to my right, my left foot, sorry, easily, and it doesn't take me off balance. All right, so if you don't have the sway, you can't get this position, you can't balance it. Likewise, if I have no sway at all, and just close my feet, I do it particularly badly, of course, it's going to hinder me, I'm going to want to fall over. So the sway anchors me to the right here, so that I can close my feet and maintain my balance easily. All right, so on a waltz, in the natural turn, when you're dancing forwards, over those 3 steps, you've got sway on 2 of them. So you have no sway on the first step, but then you've got sway on the second step and the third step being when you close, and then you lower. But as you lower, you're going to go back to neutral, because then we're going to start doing the backward action, okay, which may well be a forward action, depending on what you're doing. And then you're going to be starting the same process again, but in reverse. So if we look at that now, so when I dance backwards, again, no sway on the first step, I've got that little indicator, which has been given to me by the person who's coming forwards. This is why it's important that it's not just the leader that leads all the time. That makes sense. Bit of a ridiculous thing to say, really, to be honest, isn't it? Because a leader, by definition, is a leader. But the person moving forwards is typically in charge. The person moving backwards is being passive and receiving the weight and receiving the movements from the person coming forward. So when you're dancing in your partnership, you're always leading and following. You're taking it in turns, okay? So it's never just, unless you're dancing with me, of course, and then I'm always in charge. I've got hold of you and I'm moving you, it's my job. No, we take it in turns. So when Kelly and I dance, there are certain aspects that she's in charge of and there's certain aspects that I'm in charge of. Again, that's another topic about generalised, it's quite a general statement, but there are things that we have responsibilities for all the time. But in terms of this aspect, so when we're talking about the sway here, the person who's coming forward is indicating where we're going to turn, and then it's both of our jobs to produce the sway as we do it. Anyway, moving on. So if you're going backwards, you've indicated you're going to do this. So I've put the CBM in, my body is turned towards my leg. So my left leg is going back, my right side's turned towards it, like so. So I know I'm going to be doing a turn. And here, the sway comes in as soon as that second step, the right foot goes into position. I'm very much anchored here now on my left foot, which helps me to balance. And then I close my left foot to my right foot, maintaining the sway, which not only does it look beautiful, but it allows me to balance perfectly on my feet. And then as I lower, it goes back to neutral, ready for the next step, which may or may not have sway depending on what I'm going to do. All right, so you don't sway. So if we look at a natural turn, you don't sway on the first step, you just have a little bit of turn in the body, okay, whether you're going forward or whether you're going backwards, all right? And then on the second step, you've got lots of sway going in, and then you keep that sway as you close your feet to stop you from falling over. The sway is the inclination of the body towards centre of turn, but I also think of it as an anchor. I anchor myself to the centre, to the inside, and then dance away from it, which creates that beautiful stretch. Now, another little thing to talk about with sway. Sway, the definition of it as well in the technique book, is that it comes from the floor. Now, sometimes that's very difficult to picture, because that would imply something like, it's difficult to even visualize at times, or even demonstrate that you're swaying from the floor, something like that. It's very difficult to try and picture that, because the idea is that sway is just coming from the waist. Now, sway from the waist is called broken sway. And the idea of that being is that half of your body is doing something the other half isn't, so you're kind of broken at the waist. In motion, when you're moving, it's much easier to show that you're swaying from the floor when you're in motion. So that's the idea. Really, the feeling is that my sway is happening from the floor right the way through to the top of my head. Rather than, if I go to airplane mode, when I go to airplane mode, it's very easy to see. It's very easy to see this way. It's not just something like that. Many people, when they're dancing and they're first learning sway, will typically show me semaphore. And there's not a lot of call for semaphore these days at airports, I'm sure, because not so many planes are travelling. But if you've got a couple of table tennis bats, by all means practice at home, some big headphones on perhaps. But when we dance, we don't want to do any of that. So sway is not the movement of the arms at all. Sway is the whole body shaping either left or right. And when I say body, I mean legs as well. So the feeling should come from the floor right the way through the body to the top of the head. Now there are some great exercises you can use to do this, one of which is something like that, where you would, so we'll do this. Do you know what? We can do this. If you're watching this, just by all means just watch. You can, if you're sitting in a chair, just do it. Just do broken sway in your chair. Or if you fancy getting up off your bottom and having a little go, by all means, please do this along with me. So what you can do is you can stand with your weight on both feet for a second. I'm going to move to your right. And as you go to the right, you're going to take your left arm, right arm, because we're in reverse, aren't we? I always get so confused. You're going to take your right arm up over your head like that and feel that you shape and bring that leg in underneath you. So there's no weight in this foot. So this is a hesitation action that you would have in waltz and quick step and foxtrot. So you're going to go to the right, you're going to bring that left leg in, and in doing so you're going to feel this stretch right the way across. And then you can do the same thing going the other way. Again, feeling that stretch. Okay? So we go to the right and we go to the left. Now, these sort of movements make me think of Thin Lizzy from TVAM. So perhaps next time, or when you're doing this on your own without me, maybe you can pop your leotards on. Black and white stripe, that rings bells to me. I don't know why that seems to stick in my head. Big curly hair, and you can have your sweatband on your head as well, which would be great. And that's quite useful. So yeah, I think of that when she was doing all these moves. I remember all of that. So anyway, I move to the right and swing the arm up. So my right side, if any of you have maybe a bit of lockdown curves, you can feel the side of your body creasing. And that means then you have produced sway. If it just breaks like that, of course, that's no good. This is the left, so there's two sides of the body working here. My right side is really stretching up as high as possible, and my left side is, I feel like this is pushing up this way to produce a crease through this side of my body. So I'm not just dropping a side, I'm lifting one side and feeling the other side still tries to stay as long as it was, which causes the creases. And then the same thing this side as well. So now my left side is trying to stretch more than the right, sorry, but the right side is still trying to stay upright, which is causing the curve and causing a bit of a crease here. I think that's quite a good little exercise. It hurts me, hurts through here. So if it's hurting me, hopefully it's hurting you too, because I like to inflict pain, don't I? That's the idea. I don't really like to inflict pain. I'm joking. I don't at all. I don't at all. But it's all good. When you're using your body and you feel your body working, it's a good thing for you. It releases natural endorphins and you'll always feel good about it afterwards. So dancing should be a full body exercise and active workout. So you should be using your body. The more we use our bodies, the better we will dance. Anyway, back to sway. So that's a good exercise, to feel where the body's got to work. Now, I utilize that feeling all the time whenever I'm swaying. So if I go back into my waltz action, if I move forwards, so I've got the rotation here. Now, as I'm going to step to the side, I'm feeling that stretch through the side of my body. And then as the right leg closes up, I'm on my toes this time rather than hesitating and dragging the foot. But I still feel I've got that same stretch coming through the right side as well as the left. Now, if I put my arms back down into dance position, or if I go to my airplane mode, I'm there. Okay? So the feeling is I'm doing perhaps quite a lot, but visually it doesn't necessarily look a great deal. Okay? So you wouldn't want to be doing too much. Now, this moves me on to another little point about sway. So, as we said before, the definition of sway is the inclination of the body towards centre of turn. Remember that, write it down. You will be tested. Sway is proportional to how fast or how much you move forward or backwards. So it's very important that those two things balance themselves out, because we'll go back to the other thing we talked about earlier, where without sway, you can feel a bit awkward or peculiar. Now, likewise, if you've got too much sway, you can also look awkward and feel peculiar. So it's important to get a balance. Dancing is always about a balance, not just in a visual sense, but actually in a physical sense of being balanced over your feet. You can never do anything unless you're balanced. If every time you stood up and fell over, it's very difficult. This is why restaurants on frozen lakes just don't work very well, because the waiters always drop all the food, because they're trying to carry the food across the ice and they just slip over all the time. So it's pointless. And those things, they fell flat on their face. So if you've invested in those, I'm very sorry for you. But they just don't work. So when you're out of balance and not in balance, things don't work as well. So when you're on balance, things work much better. And it's easier to think, because you're also not trying to worry about surviving, which I know from my own experience as a dancer. When I didn't understand balance enough, all you're worried about is trying to survive. You're literally like Bambi on ice. So you're dancing and hoping for the best that you're going to be on your feet. And if you're always going into things with fear in that respect, and if you're going to fall over, you can't ever dance your best. Anyway, these things take practice though, unfortunately. So we've done this exercise before, but I'm not going to use that specific exercise. I'm going to develop it slightly. But we've done this one before where we do what we call our drive actions, where we move forward and backwards, to develop how we move forwards and how we move backwards in our swing dances in ballroom. Now that's important to understand in how you move, because this amount of drive, so however much you put in here, will be directly proportional to how much you sway. I like to give it a number. So if I move a 5, I've got to sway a 5. So if I give me some space, so if I drive a 5, then I can sway a 5 and balance it, and it's nice and easy. If, however, I move a 1 and sway a 5, balance is a bit dodgy, and it looks more awkward than in terms of feeling, because it doesn't look quite right. I can make it work, but it doesn't look very good. And likewise, if I move a 5, or let's say I move a 7 and only sway a 2, I'm falling over again, because I've got no anchor and I've got no balance. And exactly the same thing will apply when you move backwards. If I move backwards with a 5, that time I moved backwards with a 5 and swayed with about a 3. So that was the bad example, of course. That's what I planned to do. So if I move backwards for a 5 and then sway for a 5, it's very easy to balance. However, of course, if one or the other isn't balanced with each other, it's very difficult. But these things, unfortunately, you can only get with time and practice. The other thing, of course, to bear in mind is that when you're doing this, you're not doing it on your own. You're doing it with a partner. Those of you that don't have permanent dance partners at the moment, of course, can't practice this. But if you do have a partner, of course, at home, lying around somewhere in a cupboard, you can get them out of the cupboard and you can have a little go with them, can't you? But of course, you've got to do the same thing each time. So it's important to always repeat and do the same amount each time to try and replicate it, because that's the only way you'll get used to it. And that only comes through feel and practice. But generally speaking, if you get the general gist of that, and that you give everything the same level of energy, then it should work. It should work. But first of all, you've actually got to know to do it and when to do it. So if we go back to that we'll go back to the waltz example, we're going to go to Foxtrot in a second, and then we're going to do a spin, just to complicate matters. So when you're doing the waltz, so you've got 6 steps in your natural turn. So if you take the 1 and the 4, so 1 and 4, whether you're going forward or backwards, no sway. And then 2, 3, and then 5 and 6, you've got sway. And it's always going to be the direction of the leading foot. So here's another little top tip for you to learn about sway in the waltz and most dances. However, there are a few little changes, which I'll allude to in a second. So when we do a waltz, if you go forward on the right, you're going to sway to the right. If you go back on the left, you're going to sway to the left. And likewise, if you go like a reverse turning waltz, if you go forward on the left, you're going to sway to the left. And if you go back on the right, you're going to sway to the right. And it is that simple. And typically speaking, in basic figures, where you close your feet in waltz, you will sway a different side every 3 steps. So therefore, it makes it look nice and it looks normal. All right. So, and it's every 3rd step will be a change of sway. All right. And that first step will be neutral. Again, that makes it look nice because you come back to neutral and then you shape again. Come back to neutral and then shape again. Because if you were to do something like this, which is what people tend to do when they first learn sway, and we're back to looking awkward again, because the amount of sway is disproportionate to the amount of movement. So the idea, of course, would be no sway, sway, no sway, sway, no sway, sway, for example. Okay? And that makes it look nice. But it's changing every 3rd step, in a sense. And it's the same moving backwards, of course, as well. So try and remember that it's proportional to how much you move. So if you're on your bike again, and you're going downhill really fast, or faster than normal, when you get to the end, you're going to have to shape and lean a bit faster, or a bit harder, sorry, more, into the corner, left or right. Otherwise, you'll fall over and go over the handlebars. Now, if you're on a motorbike, it goes the other way. You get what's called counter sway. We're not going to get into that, because none of you, well, I hope not, are riding your motorbikes with your knees touching the ground. Let's forget about that for the moment, because that's dangerous. No one should be doing that. So something to consider when you're doing the waltz, every time you close your feet and you hold that position, you're going to be doing a sway. You're going to be swaying one way or the other. There are a few examples where we don't sway in waltz. One of them is the chasse. So when you do a chasse, it's got a side close side action to the left, side close side, or if you're dancing that as a lady, side close side to the right. Now, when you finish with your feet apart, you don't have any sway. So a chasse has got 4 steps. So if we do it after a whisk, you're going to step, I'm doing it as lady. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And it finishes with your feet apart. So there's no sway in that. So this only relates to figures where you close your feet and hold that position with turn. So a chasse, whilst a lady will turn a quarter to the left as she does it, it's only going from promenade position to closed position. So there's no sway on a chasse. Same in a quick step, there's no sway on a chasse in quick step either. When you do a spin in any dance, there's never any sway. So if I just spin on the spots, there is no sway. That's relevant for your spin turn. Now, the first 3 steps of a spin turn are the same as the first 3 steps of a natural turn. So you've got no sway, sway, sway. Now, as you then go into the spin, you go back to neutral, but then as you pivot round, there's no sway. And at the end of that, there's no sway either. However, when you get good, you have a little bit of sway to start with, and then after you spin, you may well show some lovely sway at the end of that. But that's later. That's when you've got control of your balance, when you've practiced it. Okay, but anytime you spin, and a spin or pivot, so the definition of a spin or pivot is a turn around a fixed point. So as you're pivoting here, you're on the spot, you're not going anywhere. We don't have any sway. There you can, when you develop your dance, though, as I say, you can create some sort of artistic interpretation to that to make it look nice. But at the moment, there's no sway. All right? So for the lady, backside close, obviously swaying on the first 3 steps. Then as she goes forward, she goes to neutral. And then as she pivots round, there's no sway. But then as you come out of that, which normally would be a 4, 5, 6 of a reverse turn, the sway action comes back in again. And we have a nice bit of shape because it always looks nicer. And also it balances where we're going. So without the sway, we fall over because it's a balancing agent as well as being the inclination of the body towards centre of turn. Write that down, remember it. You're going to be tested later. Just quickly changing dances. Before we go to Foxtrot, actually, we're going to talk about tango. There's no sway in tango. Now, one of the reasons we don't have any sway in tango is because we have no body flight. Now, again, that's another big topic, but just very briefly, when your body is in what we call flight, it's not real flight, of course, because we can't fly. As much as many of us try, we can't fly. So when we move forward, our body weight escapes out of our feet, creates rise, like this, which I'm going to talk about this another time perhaps. This is a little lead on to another discussion for another time. So your body weight goes outside of your feet, it releases your heels, which produces rise. So I didn't try and go off my toes at all, and yet I'm on my toes. Just by allowing the body weight to fall out of my feet. Okay, it creates rise. Now we don't have that in tango. Because we don't have that in tango, there's nothing to balance as such. Because when I do any kind of turn in tango, if I do a reverse turn for instance, you place your feet to where they're going to finish. So that at no point are you, or technically should you be, out of balance in a flight sense. So there's nothing to catch. There's nothing to counterbalance. So we don't have any sway in tango through the basic actions. Now, once you get a little bit more fancy, let's say an over sway, like something like that, we do have sway, but we call that broken sway because it's not coming from the, well, we feel it from the floor, but it's not the same as we'd have in waltz where we'd have a rise action, some sort of lilting feeling. It's very clinical and shaped and sharp, and that comes from the body to create the illusion of enjoyment. Well, not so much the enjoyment there necessarily, but it just looks nicer, So that's something we do have, but it's not through the basic actions in tango at all, purely because there's no rise. There's no rise, there's no fall, there's nothing to catch, there's nothing to balance, so we don't need to worry in that respect. Foxtrot, however, is a little bit different. So Foxtrot is mostly, Foxtrot incorporates lots of straight line motion. So for instance, a feather step, if I dance it straight towards the camera, so I have my feather step, I'm coming towards you, there's no turn here, and yet I am swaying to the right. But that is, I think, mostly because of the visual. You want to make it look relatively nice. But there's also another thing to bear in mind. As I'm doing this, I'm moving outside the lady's feet. And the lady's turning her body to allow me to do so. So to facilitate that, it's important to have a little bit of stretch and lift to the left side so it gives you space for the right leg to swing forward outside the lady's feet. Now, without any sway, if I did something like that, it's going to be very difficult. Okay, I'm going to get blocked, it's going to be tricky, I won't have any space. So by having a bit of rotation, we had the same CBM, same as in the waltz. So we've got this little bit of turn through the body because I'm now going to lead with my left side outside the lady's feet. So this extra little stretch through the left side, as I do that, fellas, is going to allow me to step outside of her feet on the right foot, and in doing so produces some sway. Now we have a similar thing in the 3-step, where we go in between the lady's feet, like that, and again we produce a nice sway to the left. And again, it's about the visual aspect, but also because turn and sway are directly linked, as we discussed previously with the handlebars and all that. Now, whilst we haven't got the same degree of rotation or physical turn around the floor in the Foxtrot on straight line steps, what we do have is obviously that we've got the bodies to combat with. So we've got a body glued to us in front of us. If I do a three-step, which goes in between the lady's feet, and I just come straight at her like this, it's going to knock her over. All right, she's going to feel very much like she's being attacked by her partner. So we have to combat that somehow, and in doing so, we rotate the body. So the body turns. Now, we talked about the turn earlier, didn't we? However much you turn depends on how much you sway. So you need to turn, and in doing so, we also need to produce some sway to make things look nicer and feel a bit nicer. So it stops you feeling awkward and doesn't make you look peculiar. Or was that the other way around? Was it stops you looking awkward and feeling peculiar? In either way around, it makes you look better. Now the reverse turn and the natural turn, those figures still have sway in the same way that we'd have it in waltz. So typically at the end of a feather step, we would do a reverse turn, which turns to the right. So we'd have the CBM on the first step, the indicator, pop the indicator on to know that we're going to turn. And then as we step around the lady, we would be swaying to the left. And then as we step back on the left foot, we're still swaying to the left. And then before we do the last bit, step 4, we go back to neutral. And then we sway again on steps 5 and 6, which is identical to the reverse turn in waltz. We just don't close our feet. Likewise, on the natural turn in the Foxtrot, we have the same principle again as well. So we sway into it, but on the very last bit, which is a bit different, the sway on that is not the same. The sway on the last bit is not the same. So perhaps that is again another discussion for another time. So the differences between the dances with the figures. As a general rule though, just to sum up really, as a general rule, if you turn, you will need to sway. And if you move forward a factor of 5 or backwards a factor of 5, you will need to sway a factor of 5. Because if they're imbalanced, you will be imbalanced and you will fall over. And then coupling that with your partner, you've both got to do the same thing. And it's all about feel, ultimately, at the end of the day. So what to me feels like a 2, for instance, to someone else could feel like a 25. All right, so it's important to practice these things. One of the things that one of my teachers a long time ago used to say to me was that you just do it. You just do it until you don't fall over anymore. And really that's a great belief to have and a mantra to have really. Just keep doing it until you stop falling over. That doesn't work with the restaurants on ice though, unfortunately. That doesn't work in that respect, I think, because they're onto a losing battle from word go really. But in terms of dancing, just keep doing it until it doesn't feel awkward anymore and doesn't look peculiar. I think that's important too. So essentially, sway is the inclination of the body towards centre of turn. Remember that, write it down. And generally, you've got it all the time in all of the dances except tango, because we haven't got any flight. I think we'll look at flight another time perhaps. Anyway, that'll do for now. Hopefully that's given you an insight into a bit of sway. If you've got any questions, let us know. Cheers. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to like it, subscribe and click the notification bell icon down below to get all of the latest updates to Dizzyfeet TV. And while you're here, check out these videos. But remember, most importantly, to dance more and worry less.